everybody. Glad to have you on today for Leadership Matters. And for those of you that were ready for us a week ago and you've rescheduled with us, thank you, because I was crazy sick with the vid and completely wiped out my voice. But we're glad to have you. I'm here with my good friend Liz Wiseman. And today we're going to be talking about this middle management squeeze, which is come to us, all of us, in such an interesting way. And we'll tell you a little bit about on how we picked today's challenge. But first, for those of you that are new and this is your first time with us at Leadership Matters, this show's about us taking on the hardest leadership challenges, particularly your challenges. We take in requests on issues that people are struggling with that we can really double click on, do some research on, and figure out what's the best way that we can respond to these challenges. And for today's show, we'll be exploring this unique position that a lot of middle managers find themselves in, with loads of pressure from the top, but struggling to kind of grab the very best work and capability from those folks that are reporting to them to be able to kind of align with the overall organization's goals. But before we get into that, let's just talk a little bit about the game, the rules. I mean, live show, we want for you to be chatting the whole time. Actually, we really can't solve these problems without your chat. So as you have ideas, or if you think of things that you do that you know works for the problems that we're talking about, please put those in chat. We read through all of the chats. We're mining for solutions that we can be sharing out to your colleagues and those of you that join us in this community.
So Shawn, why don't you give just like a chat? Let's warm up chat a little bit. Maybe throw a prompt out there, something you want to hear everyone just chime in on from the get-go.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. So we're gonna be
just like even starting with how are you?
So let's do this. So just tell us where you are in the world and one thing that's on your mind, from a work perspective, from a personal perspective, just like what is on your mind today. It can be goofy, please be goofy. But just share where you are and let's kind of get like a feel for where everybody's coming in from. Okay, and we're right now here in Menlo Park, California, and it is lovely. And what's on your mind, Liz?
Well, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about this middle management squeeze, and in particular, what leading looks like in this new world of work. We've been using this term new world of work. I think it's in the subtitle of one of my books, like, why learning beats knowing in the new game of work. But I think as people redefine their relationships to work, it is making leadership more challenging. Mm-hmm. And I think it's pushing us to the edge of what we know how to do and what we know how to do well. And so I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about what is this new work deal like? So what's the chat? What's the prompt that we had for everyone?
Well, let's see what we have in chat. Okay, thanks. Coming in from Boston, we've got Fountain Hills, Arizona. This is we're all over. Johannesburg, South Africa. What time is it for you out there? Grand Junction, Colorado. Interested in learning more from Liz? Well, you are in the right place then, Michelle. Ottawa, glad to have our friends on from Canada. Okay, yeah, this is good. We've got pretty much an international audience here. And of course, for those of you that will be watching this in recording, we know that you are all over the world, and we're so glad that you are with us. Well, let's kind of get into this. So here's what happened. So as we went out, we go out once a month to a group of many of you. Thank you for being in this group called the Leadership Matters Insiders Group, to ask what are these challenges that you are facing, and two challenges kind of really named and experienced. So I'm going to open the stage in a part one, part two. So here it is. First, I'm going to read through the two challenges that we took on for today, and then I'm going to tell a little story that really cemented that this is an important topic for us to spend some time on. So here it is. The first challenge that came through that we caught our eye was this. Mike P says, I have a team of younger employees who want to do big things in their careers, but I can see that they aren't willing to do what it takes to win in our company. How do I approach the situation? Okay, now take that with the second challenge that we picked, and you'll see the theme right off the bat. Here's the second theme that we or challenge that we picked. It's from Mariel, and she says, I'm a middle manager. I'm struggling to motivate and engage my younger team members to keep the production schedule that senior management is demanding. How can I talk with my SVP about this without looking like I'm trying to avoid responsibility? Okay, so there, between these two juxtaposition problems, we see the challenge. One leader who recognizes that their younger contributors may not see what it takes to win in a particular organization. Maybe they're cutting it a little short or undersizing it. And then this other manager who's trying to figure out, how do I balance the demand of what senior management wants from the way that my contributors are orienting themselves to the work. So we are out working with a client, and we're in this workshop, and let's call it 80 managers in this workshop. And somebody raised their hand, and he said, "Hey, listen, I've got a team of young contributors. Really enjoy working with them, but I've noticed two things. One, they really kind of stick to what's exactly laid out for them to do, and if it's not laid out, they kind of stop." That was the first thing. And the second thing is he said, but also I'm struggling to hold them accountable, and senior management's really kind of bearing down on me. It just seems like that when I try to push for them to give me more, they kind of push back. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. How many of you are having this problem? And of all the managers that were in the room, every single hand went up except for two. Okay, then the
Okay,
next.
so wait, Shawn, can we just pause on that? Tell me what's going through your mind as virtually all of these managers say, I'm dealing with this too. What's going on? And what are you seeing in people's faces?
Well, honestly, there was a lot of concern, irritation, like fervent agree, like I agree with this. Like, yes, this is happening to me. I wanted to say that. So it was one of those moments where, in the room, you can't keep going. You have to stop. There's something so hot that's going on that if you don't address it, we're not going to be able to focus on anything that follows. And so what was going in my mind was
your strengths as an educator and a facilitator is when you sense that there is a struggle, you stop and you deal with it. And I think in some ways it's a metaphor for what we're trying to do right now, which is we're sensing that people are struggling with this. We need to stop and deal with it. And I think it's part of what we're trying to do today. So keep going. Like what's happening now in this room?
Well, so I'm paused. I'm kind of asking other people to chime in and to color it out. And so we did that with around 10, 15 people, really to try to color out how were they seeing that? What was the variance? What was the challenge that they saw? And while they were speaking, I unfortunately and fortunately kind of went to this time travel to the week before. I'm in a boardroom with the senior management team of a international multi-billion-dollar business, and the CEO at a break pulls me aside and says, "Shawn, I'm super concerned about where we are from a leadership perspective, because here's the problem. When we try to get clear on the strategy at the top, as it starts to disseminate down, we see this massive amount of resistance, and I just can't get everybody on board. I can't marshal the intelligence and the troops or the mind power of the organization. There seems to be this resistance that occurs the further we get down, and it's something that I've not seen before in my career." So these two halves are colliding in my mind in this workshop. And then we read these two challenges that come through, and there was many more, and it makes us think we better pause and start talking about this kind of squeeze that middle managers are finding themselves in between these two halves. And maybe we have, as we think about what leaders expect and what they've experienced through their careers that are senior versus middle managers that are working with folks that are just coming into the workforce, there is a lot of frustration and dissonance converging at these two halves.
And Shawn, I'm hearing it everywhere. And I'm hearing it from senior leaders who say, I've been doing the things that I've been doing and they're just not working anymore. Like somehow I can't harness the intelligence of the team. I can't get my arms around it. I can't get people to step up. Like what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on? I think we've got a poll in here somewhere about to what extent are you doing that? But maybe before we do that, we should spend some time on what's happening in the macro economic space, what's happening in the workplace, what's happening with this rising generation of workers. Like, where are we? And we thought that would be a good place to start. Whenever I want to like know what's going on around me, and it's something beyond what I'm reading in the paper and all of the journals and blogs that I'm following, you know who I call?
Lauren.
I phone a nerd. I phone my favorite nerd. And I'm like, Lauren, help us size this problem. Help us get our arms around it. What is going on? And bring numbers and data to something that we are all feeling right now. So, Lauren, are you with us? Are you ready?
I'm here. Got a couple of things to share about this. And where I want to start is actually with a recent McKinsey study where they asked workers of all ages about their experiences in the workplace, but also like their views and kind of their beliefs about work. And one of the things that this revealed is that the youngest workers, the bucket they put it in was 18 to 24, really have significantly less confidence in like the concept of work as a process than all older groups. 59% of this group of 18 to 24-year-olds say that they don't expect to ever be able to own a home. And that's compared to about 30% of all older groups. 23% of them say they never expect to be able to retire. That's less than 14% among all other groups. So they have these concerns about like the stability of their employment now, as well as like when they think about their future. And whether by choice or by situation, this group of the youngest employees are finding a new and a different path, like with regard to employment. Over half of them are doing independent work. Close to half of them say, like, I don't want a 9-to-5 job. I want a less traditional economic opportunity.
Laura, did you say over half don't want to have a 9-to-5 job?
40%.
40%.
And I'm assuming that's not half the people saying, I don't want a 9-to-5 job. I want a 9-to-4 job. I think it's something bigger than
yeah, right. Yeah.
It's not like, gee, I don't want to overwork. It's like, I'm just not so sure about that whole structure of work being a big box.
Yeah.
It's almost like a rejection of big box retail, like
yeah,
the whole big box model of work. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah.
Okay, Lauren, keep going.
Yeah, so for those who are working, about 25% are working multiple jobs. A huge portion of them are working maybe less traditional jobs where they're on their own. They don't have a boss. They're kind of making their own way in employment. And close to a quarter, 23.5% of 15 to 24-year-olds worldwide are not in education, employment, or training of any type. So we're seeing just this massive shift in approach to work.
So Lauren, can you just repeat that last statistic? Because when I read this piece, it was, I think, in Fortune magazine, I had to stop and look at this like 3 times to make sure I was reading it. Like one more time on that with is it the NEETs?
Yes. So this is per a recent International Labor Organization study that is kind of one of the go-to sources for like global labor statistics. They found that of 15 to 24-year-olds worldwide, 23.5% of them are what they call NEETs, not in education, employment, or training.
1/4.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah, it's like 1/4 of the available workforce seems to be opting out of big box work or the things that tend to lead up to it, training, education. It's a stunning statistic, which has a lot of implications for labor shortage, but also has implications for the orientation people have when they show up to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important for us to understand like some of these, what maybe have been fringe orientations to work, even if you are managing someone who is not on one of those fringes, they know someone who's opting out of work. And so it has this spillover kind of effect to how they show up in the big box of work. Okay, Lauren, what else? What else is going on out there?
Well, I can tell you that like people aren't thriving. It's hard to pin, what's a cause and what's an effect, but well-being scores for the youngest employees are lower. This is in work and out of work. Uh, the recent Gallup State of the Workplace report that many of our friends here have probably already taken a look at showed that there was a slight dip in overall well-being for all adults in the workplace, and that was actually entirely carried by the youngest group. Like for every other group, well-being increased, but it went down for this youngest group. 55% of 18 to 24-year-olds report having been diagnosed with or receiving treatment for mental illness. So 55%, over half of this group is experiencing mental health issues serious enough that they have received a diagnosis and or treatment for it. And actually, that McKinsey study I referenced back at the beginning here paints this picture a little bit more like with regard to employment. They asked people of all ages about the barriers that keep them from working effectively. And of this youngest group, 26% say that mental health issues are a major barrier to them doing effective work. 21% say physical health issues are a major barrier. 26% say a hostile work environment is a major barrier to them working effectively. And all of these numbers are at about double what we're seeing them for older populations. So we're seeing just a fundamental difference in the way that people are experiencing work, as well as the way they are oriented toward it and what they're choosing. And that plays out for what we see with managers as well.
Yeah. And Lauren, let me add to that. Some of what we're seeing in chat here is that, and this has been going on for some time now, that there's a fundamental erosion in trust, that organizations will take care of us, that, the mental health concerns, the physical well-being, that, that our employer will look out for us during the time of our employment or after. And so another reason why more and more people are backing away from the formality of working for the organizations, I guess, working for the man, to borrow an old phrase. And then Lauren, what about, I know you gathered some fact on like, how are managers faring in all this? Like we've been focusing on this rising generation. You might look at it as Gen Z or just all those that are newish to work. Like how are managers doing?
They're stressed, of course. But one statistic that I find really interesting, and I think that this is maybe where we see engagement as kind of the holy grail of all stats start to break down a little bit, is that we see that managers are more engaged at work and have a higher percentage of like thriving at work than non-managers. They're also experiencing more stress, anger, sadness, loneliness, worry in their day-to-day work lives than non-managers are. And on top of all of that, these engagement scores are, team engagement is strongly tied to manager engagement, and companies know this. So they're looking at their managers and they know that 70% of variation in team engagement is explained by manager engagement. So much of this falls on managers, and we're also looking to managers to hold these teams together.
Yeah, for managers, it seems like you think about river rafting. When you're in white water, you're fully engaged and it's a bumpy ride. Like they're all in, there's no question about it, the data shows, but it's a bumpy ride and there's loads of emotion.
Right. And it probably feels a lot like being in that, like the whitewater, and you're the guide and you're relying, like, when you do the river rafting, there's a guide. And when he or she says like paddle right, back pedal, like they're counting on somebody to be on that raft there to paddle. And I think they're finding that there are a lot of people like, yeah, no, I'm not paddling. And so the people they need to make it through aren't entirely in the raft with them. There's been a lot of good comments on chat. I'm trying very hard not to have fumble fingers on chat and do this. I don't really trust myself. But there's a lot of good comments on chat about just the cost of living, the cost of an apartment, which is rendering young people beginning their careers, working while living at home in the parents' basement. And you have to think about when you put all these things together, what does it mean? We've got people who are seeing less upside to work. Like, I'm not going to be able to afford a house. I'm not even necessarily going to be able to afford an apartment. And so I'm going to kind of stay in maybe what you might think of as an earlier stage in life and not quite leave the nest, which means I don't really have to take full responsibility.
Yeah. And there's this, if 24% of their colleagues are opting out of work and education altogether, well, they're connected socially. They're seeing kind of like this alternative way of doing things. And so it doesn't seem like a great path or real promising. And, considering what you've just painted, and then 1 in 4 of their friends are doing nothing. So imagine the poll on, do I really want to stick to this path that I'm struggling to even know if I believe in, or if I have confidence that I'm going to get the return that I'm hoping for?
Right. And like, I could say, I see as like a younger worker, like a way to be able to afford housing and a way to move forward in life. It's to jump in both feet into work, but then add to that mistrust of organizations. And I think a lot of people are just not jumping in. Maybe in the raft, to borrow your metaphor, but I'm not sure I've got a paddle, or maybe I'm just not even going on this expedition. And I think it has a lot of managers baffled.
Yep.
And, we have, I think every generation has looked at the generation behind them and rolled their eyes, looked at it with suspicion, questioned work ethic. But I think what's fundamentally different is, we've looked down at the next generation and like, they're doing it differently. But I think what we're seeing is that it's not just a generation gap. This is a commitment gap. It's not that this rising generation wants to work differently. It seems to be a rising generation that's not sure they want to work, or that they need to work, or that it's worth it to work, or that jumping in with both feet to work isn't going to hurt them more than they already feel hurt. Like, we sense a suspiciousness to work and a real sense of injury. And boy, I think anyone who's been reading The Anxious Generation should probably come out of that with a lot of empathy for the generation that's beginning their careers right now, and what this phone-based adolescence has done, and the injury that has probably befallen this generation. So in many ways, it's not necessarily a generation gap we're looking at. Like, oh, gee, how do I lead this generation differently? What do they want from work? It's a commitment gap. And I think managers are feeling like, okay, I've got the people above me who want performance and accountability. Like, that's what I'm getting above me. And the people below me seem to want options, choice, optionality, flexibility, and protection. Protection from the organization, protection from harm. And you've got accountability demands here and protection demands coming here. And you're now in the middle, kind of feeling the ouch. And my guess is that most middle managers are feeling this squeeze and maybe feeling empathy on both sides, but maybe thinking nobody's feeling any empathy from them. But in many ways, when I look at this and try to get my arms around it, I feel like we're trying to lead in the age of disconnect. When people are disconnected from each other, obviously what remote work and the ramifications of the pandemic, but also coming to work feeling an inherent disconnect to work. And this great disconnection between our most senior leaders, who are on the hook for performance and accountability, and the contributors who are reluctant,
Mm-hmm.
maybe reluctant contributors right now. Of course, that's not describing everyone's scenario, but I think it's describing many, many people's scenario.
We're curious about you. How many of you find this to be a relevant and challenging situation to be in? We're going to put up a poll so we can see what the distribution looks like for all of you. So please contribute to the poll. To what extent is this an issue in your workplace or not an issue?
Yeah, like what extent is it happening around you? Like where you show up, where you work, where you're accountable. A lot of people here are managers, a lot of are accountable for human resources and learning development. Is this present in your workplace? To what extent? And then we're going to ask you, like, to what extent is it present for you in your own efforts to lead?
Okay, we're at about a little over 50%, and so far strong, a 4 out of 5, and 3 out of 5. So present, but not overwhelming, is the slight majority. The combined 5 and 4, we're probably at probably in that upper quartile a little bit. But very few people seeing this as a non-issue.
Right. Now, obviously, we've got some skewed data, and I imagine Lauren is thinking, okay, the data is probably a little bit skewed because by virtue of the topic, we probably gathered a group of people here who have some concern about it. So it's probably likely present in your world, but this is saying the majority of people are dealing with this. Okay. Next question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much is this affecting your ability to lead?
Yeah. Throw that in the chat.
Stuck. Like, I want to know, is this your problem? Is it one of your top 3 challenges right
Okay,
now?
I'm seeing 2s, 4s, a few 3s, 3 out of 5, 4s, another 4, some 3s. Okay, we're trending between 3 and 4.
Desperately wishing we'd see a lot of 1s in here because then I could just go back.
Oh, yeah, we're going about this. A few 1s going on here. There's a 5, a couple 3s. Oh, we've got a 1. Somebody participated in that. Thank you.
Yes, so I would feel better, but I really feel like, man, I wish this was 0s and 1s and 2s, that the way that we have been leading is fit for the future. That's what I so desperately wish.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the case. I think we're finding that many of our really good approaches to leading, many that we've written about, that, you and I spend our times out there teaching about, they're good, but perhaps insufficient for some of the challenges we're facing.
Yeah, and Serena says this. She says, as a middle manager, I'm having more of a problem with my upper leadership not seeing their responsibility to the workers. My workers want increased engagement and safety, but the leadership doesn't believe me.
And that's great, because that was the essence of the second question, which is like, I get it. Like, I am seeing, I don't want to be too dramatic, but people who have been hurt coming into work, hurt. Like, I've seen too many people tossed aside. I have a feeling that I'm working on things that might be my very undoing. Like, and of course, we've got all these existential threats, and AI is one of those that, like, maybe it's just a matter of time before I'm tossed aside, no longer relevant, no longer needed, no longer a vital resource. And I think managers see that, and you can't help but empathize. So how do we talk to people who are still saying, but I need more contribution, more effort, more impact?
Well, maybe that's a good place for us to go now. What if we take some time, just thinking collectively, all of us, about understanding this gap? Liz, what do you recommend? What's an approach that we could have to kind of thinking through, walking around this equation?
Well, let me tell you my natural approach. My natural approach is to want to jump in, to say, you know what, let's look at our best leadership practices. Let's look at how we can close this gap. Let's look at some of our best multiplier practices. Let's look at what we've learned from impact players. But I actually think we need to slow down a little bit and just try to understand this problem. Actually, there is a meta practice that can help us here. It's one of the things that we learned from studying the most impactful people in the workplace, some of the work behind impact players, is that one of their master skills is practicing the art of perspective taking. And it's something we find impact players do. It's not working heads down. or leading heads down. It's paying attention to what's going on around you and understanding that there's always this multiplicity of perspectives and points of view, and you can't add value unless you know what value looks like to everyone. It's actually really inherent in the multipliers approach to leadership, is to like be eyes up rather than getting out of our own head and saying, what is the perspective other people have, and how do I pull in all of that collective intelligence to solve a problem? And it's also one of the things at the core that I found in my research for Rookie Smarts is that when we are new to something, because we don't know what we're doing, we are like eyes wide open, taking in, trying to understand what's happening around us. And now is the time for us to do that. What we wanted to do is try to unpack this a little bit and really assess this gap that middle managers are feeling, whether you feel it like a gap, like, I don't know how to make ends meet. I don't know how to do what the people above me want. I don't know how to give what the people I'm leading need, or you feel squeeze, like, whoa, like I'm getting pressure from here or pressure from there, like whether it's a gap or a squeeze. What does it look like? And we want to look at it. What does it look like for those in senior leadership who really own the performance of an organization? What does it look like when you are in the middle leading people? And then what does it look like for people who are, I don't want to say at the bottom of organization, but let's call it early career. And Shawn, what should we go through first? And what we're going to do is we're going to ask everyone to just look at it from that perspective. So we're going to ask people not to be chatting in like maybe random points of view, but just we're going to concentrate on one perspective at a time. What's your pick?
Let's start with the middle.
Okay.
So put into chat, what's the question that we want to phrase to answer quick?
Perspective taking. What does it look like to you? Like when you are sitting in the middle of an organization, what are you seeing? Let's start with what are you seeing? And then we're going to go to what does it feel like to you?
Okay, let's see it.
Well, this is getting going. I'll give you one perspective in the middle, and I'm going to do this stepping outside of this work context and tell you this is something I harbor deep resentment about in my family. And I don't think there's anyone from my family listening, although my husband may be listening in. But we went and did a bike trip in Vietnam, and we were as a family with a guide riding through this really big city. And this is one of those cities where like there's more motorcycles than people. Like motorcycles are buzzing all around, and I'm kind of in the middle towards the back of this little family peloton, and the guide's out in front. My husband's out in front because we all know he's Larry, he's always out in the front. The older kids are in the front. Way in the back is our youngest son, Josh, and he's really struggling. He's not really great on a bike, kind of terrified of a bike. And I'm in the middle trying to like stay up with the group in front and not get lost and make sure the kid in the back doesn't die. And, and I remember how stressful this was. And I just like, all I could see were things coming at me and this gap growing bigger. And I just couldn't close it. Like, I think being in the middle of something, like you're seeing, it's almost like a cat in a car, like you're seeing so much.
Yeah. It reminds
it's like overstimulation, and I just can't do this. I can't bring these two sides together.
That the distance. So I'm thinking you triggered in me a memory that I have. I was volunteering in a church organization as like a youth leader. And so we have this first generation coming in. So this is about 15 years ago. And it was this first generation that kind of like spending a lot of time on MySpace, parking out there, on their MySpace site. And some of them were going into Facebook. And so it's kind of this first experience that parents are having with kids, just spending massive amounts of time doing this brand new activity at the teenagers, doing computer work, socially connecting, all of this. And then the parents are furious and they're fighting and they're struggling. And the parents are coming to me saying, hey, listen, you've got to get through to our kids and let them know that they're ruining their lives. And the kids are saying to me, my parents are out of touch and clueless. And I know that my role is to somehow stay within touching distance to both. to understand and be an advocate for these values, that this long-term version of these kids' selves that their parents are negotiating for,
And
but
you're like,
also
"Arms aren't
maintain
long
influence.
enough."
My arms aren't long enough. And that idea that the gap is way too big for me to close. And the feelings of, well, overwhelm me. I felt overwhelmed. I felt like that I wasn't capable enough. I felt insufficient to deal with the situation. I felt confused on like, what's my role here? How do I do this? But that was the reaction of just knowing I couldn't bridge this gap.
Couldn't bridge this gap. And, we go back, and I'm going to ask, I was trying to realizing I couldn't bridge the gap between looking at chat and listening to your story. So I'm going to ask Lauren to like scan through chat and help us see what you're seeing there. But I will kind of end this story of like this gap between the front of the little family Peloton and the back was growing bigger and bigger. And then I couldn't see him anymore.
Which side? Both sides?
No, the front, because I am staying with the back. It's kind of like the comment someone said, well, I really empathize with these kids, but I can't quite get senior leadership.
Yeah.
Like in this case, the guide and my husband, senior leadership, and they don't get that we can't keep up.
Yeah.
And I got a kid who's terrified here, and I'm just trying to keep him alive. Well, that gap grows bigger.
Yeah.
And then I can't see him anymore.
Yeah.
And so what do? Pedal faster. Pedal faster. Come on, Josh. And, and there's a big age gap between our older kids and the younger kids. That's a whole story. But, and so we're pedaling faster. Well, now we're really lost. And unbeknownst to me, and this is the part that I'm still kind of deeply resentful of, you can probably see it in my face, is they made a right turn on a street and went in an entirely different direction. And we were way far. There's no way we could see them. So they turned. I didn't know it. So we just kept going in a straight line, pedaling faster and faster, trying to close the gap. And then guess who ends up lost? We end up like lost with no language skills, no money, no cell phone, no map, no anything. And I think it can happen in organizations. Like, I can't close this gap, so let me just pedal faster in the wrong direction. I'm not resentful that we ended up lost. I'm resentful that they turned right and didn't tell us, which is kind of also a metaphor for organizational life, which is like senior leaders, like you turned right, but like didn't wait for us to catch up to this. Okay, Lauren, what are you seeing in chat?
Yeah, I think that your bike ride metaphor is playing out for a lot of people. People are talking about the need to see something from a high level, but then it's difficult to communicate that into like clear focus and goals. Like a lot of plate spinning, too many fires all at once, too many things to focus on, no time to stabilize in between these things. Big goals from the top, unclear pathways forward. And leaders who are trying to get their arms around what is important, but then middle managers who are kind of left struggling to even figure out, like, is this actually still a priority?
Okay. It's disheartening. It's exhausting. And you start to feel like ineffectual, maybe. Like, am I a good leader? And you start to question a lot. Okay, let's go to another perspective. We can either go to the senior leaders or to the rising contributors.
Yeah, let's go to the senior leaders.
Okay, because they have a valid perspective on this. And it's easy to say, they're out of touch. But they have this fiduciary responsibility. They have a stewardship for the entire organization. What does it look like from their perspective? And, of course, when I go back to this bike, I don't even know what to call it, because you could tell I'm still a little bit, I'll say sad, not bitter. But like the guide had a responsibility to like make sure that we saw the city. And I think my husband, who was there in the front, was really hopeful about like this amazing experience. And he like wanted good things for us. So like, what is that perspective like? When you've been like at the top, like you're the one who's like, come on, guys, we need this. What does it look like?
Well, I'll just go back to that conversation that I mentioned earlier with the CEO of this organization. And as I listened to him, what it looked like for him was he saw clearly what he was responsible to the board and to the investors.
Mhm.
And the return that was expected, just at the stock level, and from, as they think of all the things that they're responsible for, and was spending a massive amount of time with the senior team defining what are the challenges, looking at the research, extracting intelligence all throughout the organization to be able to chart a path and to be able to deal with, where do we invest, and where do we pull back, and how do we change. And so from his perspective, there is this massive amount of effort of caring for the future success of not just the organization, but everyone that works for the organization. And this fella cared all the way through. He wants the team to win, like a football coach that, it's in the fourth quarter and everybody's tired and it's the end of the season and they recognize that their players are beat up, but they also know that the players really care about winning, and they care about winning because they've invested everything in this whole season. And so to be sure, what was there was deep care for everyone, and also a massive amount of energy and thinking on the way forward, the path forward for everybody to win and for everyone to get the return that he genuinely was advocating for everyone involved. And deep concern that he wasn't going to get there, that they weren't going to get there, and that this was going to have a ripple effect for everybody in the
He
organization.
might let the team down.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, you could argue that maybe the objectives for the game are flawed, but it is the head of the organization and the senior leader's job to make sure the organization wins. And it's not just to deliver the win, but we all know what it's like when you're on a chronically losing team. And it is not going to help people broadly in the organization to be delivering a string of loses. Like, it's not helpful for the financial performance of the business. It's not helpful for morale. It doesn't feel good, and it doesn't help the hurt that so many people are joining the workplace with. Like, they know, like, winning is part of it.
Mhm.
Okay. Lauren, what are we seeing? What are people saying? The perspective of those that are at the tops of organizations or the heads?
Well, we're not seeing much, so throw it in the chat if you have a thought. Maybe this tells us something about our Leadership Matters viewers and who they are and which
I think it says everything about people who've been on a bike ride like I've been on. That's what I think it says.
Yeah.
What was the guy thinking? Like they're supposed to turn back every now and then and count their little chickies
Yeah.
in the back, and like, what was my husband?
Yeah.
And who the hell turns right?
Yeah. Yeah.
People behind you, see, I
Yeah.
felt like
Yep.
totally worked up
There's
about
no
this.
pain in there.
But no, there is, like, I've spent a lot of my time, with senior leaders. I've been a senior leader. I lead our organization, and I do have a ton of empathy for people who are trying to take organizations to new places, to better places. And they're doing it in an environment of uncertainty and ambiguity and change. And in many ways, they are like, kind of like the Peloton leader. So I'm going to go back to this cycling, and like what it's like to be in the head of a Peloton is that person is breaking the wind. Like, they are creating the ability for other people to draft. Now those people behind them are sort of serving them so that they can move forward and win the Tour de France or something. But like, they are doing so much heavy lifting. They're so fully committed, so and often so identifying with the organization, and often over identifying with the organization, that it's sometimes hard to process that other people don't feel similarly.
Mhm.
And I think, if we really look at empathy for those at the top, my executive coaching work has taught me that it is truly lonely at the top of organizations, and that just by virtue of being the head of an organization, you don't have a lot of people to commiserate with.
Mhm.
You can't say, oh man, work sucks right now. Like you have to sort of move forward, and it's often hard to know who you can confide with. Because that creates ripple effects in organizations. It's also hard to get a really good vision of what's happening. Like you might have this broad vision, but like you get such filtered views of what's happening on the ground that you're living in this world of distortion. And so sometimes they can't, it's not that they don't care what's happening broadly in the organization. In many ways, they can't see it. And in some ways, they don't want to see it.
Well, let's do this. Let's round
Next
this out.
perspective, yeah.
Next perspective. What about for the rising generation of talent? What can you see as you think about, if you were to think about things through their eyes, throw into chat, what kind of challenges they might see? Why might they be responding the way that they are to work, as we can see from the data? Liz, what about you? What do you think? What
Well,
do they see?
I'm just laughing at Brent's comment, Brent, who says, good one, Liz, breaking the wind. I don't want to be riding my bike behind that person. Yeah, they might be doing that as well. I hadn't thought about that. Thank you, Brett, for pointing that out. Okay. Yeah, what is it like? And I think I have to say my point of view on this has changed. And I probably, as I've been looking at what is happening in the workplace right now, what is happening as people redefine their relationship to work, I've probably been looking at it more like the person left holding the bag. Like, wait a minute, then why did you sign up for the job if you don't want to do this? Why did you join the team if you don't want to be part of the team? Like, I think my empathy has been more with my own point of view, with struggling managers in the middle. And I have spent more time thinking about what does it look like from their perspective? And I think in some ways it looks like this is a game I can't win.
Yeah.
I can't win. Like, I don't see what's in it for me. And so I'm going to detach. Like, I often tell the story about what happens when we have pace setter leaders. And, I tell the story about me running ahead to the bus stop with my youngest son, Josh, who loves to run. And, I would always try to keep it close, but every now and then I would forget that I was, a good mother, and I would race ahead and I would win that race. And I would look back, and what was my youngest son, who supposedly loved running, what was he doing? He's walking. And I think we see this dynamic is like when that gap gets to be too big, when people are like, I can't win this game. I feel hurt and nobody is taking care of me, and maybe the people, the generation who did this to me, canceled my schools, did whatever it caused them to feel disconnected. We stop trying and we hold back because we don't like staying in games we can't win. You see that anytime you pull together one of these like family game night things, when there's someone like they just can't play, it's better to disengage than to keep losing over and over. And I would call on everyone who has children who are entering the workforce. Shawn, you've got children entering the workforce. I have children in the workforce, entering the workforce, struggling to enter the workforce. I have kind of the full range. And what does it look like from their point of view?
Yeah, when I think about my experience with I've got three boys, youngest 19, 20, and 22. And as I've kind of experienced through their eyes, just, what does it look like different to grow up from my generation? Ann and I, we got married, high school sweethearts, got married several years later. We had Joseph. So we were younger, 20, I think I was 24. And so pretty close in terms of, it was easy for me to really remember what things were like for me growing up and how different that was for them, especially by the time they hit high school. And just the pressure of the personal brand, which was absent from my experience growing up. I didn't know what a brand was. I mean, other than I think I kind of understood Nike and that they had a
brand new shoes.
Yeah, right. Exactly. This idea of, in order for me to be accepted and to do well, I need to build a personal brand. The impact on everyone that I saw, my kids and the kids that they hung out with, was massive. And the amount of anxiousness and fear that comes from this idea that you need to be something that you're not. You need to figure out what that is. You need to create it and you need to maintain it. How does that work when you don't know anything at work and you need actually a beginner's mindset to win? That doesn't work. That causes the gears to grind to a halt.
Yeah. So let's do this. Let's look. Lauren, could we ask you to maybe echo or summarize what you're seeing on chat? And then I'm looking at our time. We've got 7 minutes before we wrap here. And we probably want to save about 5 of them for here are a couple practical things. I think, as Shawn alluded to at the top of our conversation, we see this as a 2-part conversation. And in our next one, we're going to focus on leadership, management strategies, team strategies that can help close this gap. And we'll maybe end with one. I'd love for Shawn to talk about what leaders can do to make work clear and work light for the people that they lead. Lauren, what are we seeing?
I'm seeing a lot about the discouragement that can come from having a lot of uncertainty, that it can be frustrating to be expecting fast results or be used to quick results and then not be getting them. It can be frustrating to be at a complete loss for how to get the experience that is required, at least according to job postings, when it just feels impossible. Like you said, just a game that you can't win. And Lisa had a comment I thought was great. How do I know that what I'm spending my time on will not be interrupted by the next big vision, making what I'm doing obsolete?
Yeah.
And this is particularly true as organizations are dealing with greater levels of ambiguity and uncertainty. The default reaction is, let's reorganize, let's change. I've been reading this book, The Problem with Change. And in this, Ashley, the author, makes a really great point of what life in this blender of constant churn is doing for people. Shawn, I know you've been spending a lot of time over the last several years researching, in some ways, life in the blender. And with all of the chaos around us, what leaders can do to help entire teams achieve clarity. And I think one of the things that we can offer is a path through this uncertainty and what to focus on.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was interesting to me this week was, as we were looking at how when it's not clear to an individual contributor how they can grow in the organization, what are the common things that the managers are experiencing? And so here's what we found. When the manager isn't clear on what the goals are for that department or that organization, or that there's so many goals, they don't know what the real priority is, because it doesn't seem like that there really is a priority. They're just being asked to do a lot of things. So it's fuzzy for them. What doesn't happen is coaching and helping people figure out what their own personal career goals could be and how they can grow in their career, a bigger picture for them as an individual. So you kind of are putting their own personal growth into the plan. So they're clear on how how their current job is going to benefit both the organization and their career. That clarity doesn't come through. Whereas when it's very clear from management what the priority is, and we're clear on what we're saying no to and what we're saying yes to, a natural coaching kind of skips that next step down. So think of this like from grandparents to grandkids, right? Skips, this level to where you have a lot of coaching and a lot of clear alignment between personal growth for the individual contributors on this team. So it becomes clear to me that as a manager, if things aren't clear, really clear on what matters, so you know where to place your bets, you have to fight for it. That interaction between you and your boss actually matters way more by default than we would guess, because we're less likely to try to coach and to really bring the hope of career promise into our contributors' lives when we're just simply not clear on the goal. So it means that your relationship with your manager is critical, because as you work and fight to clarify what matters for your team, on how your team can have the greatest impact, that conversation, that negotiation, that effort is going to naturally turn you into a much able and better coach.
Well, in some ways, you're saying like that person becomes your filter into this world of chaos. And, to me, this seems like the most important thing managers can do right now is to provide that clarity of focus. I read somewhere that we've got a rising generation that I don't know if they said they can't do anything that's not on a rubric, but like they respond best to a
Right.
rubric.
Yeah.
Like
Clear instructions.
here's what an A looks like.
Yeah.
And here's what you need to do, like assignments. This is your assignment. And I think if managers can help people, here's what's important now, here's the assignment, and provide that clarity, it provides just enough safety for people to say, I'm willing to reach for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is probably my biggest aha is as I've been looking more and more into what is the redefinition of work and the workplace, and particularly how is Generation Z and the rising generation looking at work, it's easy to conclude this is a segment of the population that doesn't want to work.
Yeah.
But we brought our glasses and we can't really go an effort. I have new threat lens. Like, I think it's very easy to look at that through this threat lens and say, you know what? I don't have the talent I need. I got a bunch of people taking up seats in their raft and they don't have paddles. Like they didn't bring their paddle. They're not willing to contribute. And I think if you look at this and take that threat lens
And
off.
if you have that, you're the manager.
Yes.
Were you the contributor explaining that?
No, this is like the manager looking at this through this threat lens. But
And there's no way I'm going to see opportunity in that.
no. And I think what I've learned is like we as a managers, like we have this opportunity to help an entire generation of people find satisfaction and success in work in however they define a great work life. In our next session, we're going to talk more about what a great work life is. And I think, I'm of a generation where that looked similar to us. And I think we're seeing a far more fragmented view of what a great work life, but we as leaders, if we can figure out what a great work life looks for them, we have this opportunity to help people connect the dots between here's what I want out of my work experience, and here's a piece of work and how I can work that will get us there.
Yeah, there may never have been a time where managers have a greater possibility for real life impact. I mean, completely changing people's lives as they're trying to transition into work. And we have all this doubt and lack of assurance and mental instability. Great managers will have an incredible influence in the trajectory of people's lives.
And I think great sports coaches understand it. And you talked about a coaching mentality. I think kind of in summing up so much of what I've seen is we have to continue this evolution of manager as like performance coach to manager as life coach, and maybe even manager as counselor and advisor. And I think if we can find ways for people to step into work in healthy ways, like we are going to be able to close this gap. And I think we will have this enormous impact. I think we're going to find some managers like, I don't want to do this job. I'm out. And then I think we're going to find people that the job will be inhabited by people who enjoy seeing people develop and seeing young people thrive. And I think if we don't want to do that job, we might need to get out of these roles fast.
Yeah, right. Thanks everybody for joining. So next Leadership Matters, we'll be doing part 2 of this conversation, and we'll really be focusing around the leadership practices. And we'll look at both sides of the equation. How can you manage up in this squeeze, if you will? And also, how can you make this coaching difference for those people that are coming into work, maybe different than contributors that we've seen in the past. It's been so awesome to have you on. We look forward to really looking through the chat to look for those gems that you've shared with us. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.